Fight Strength, Chapter 11. We drilled the Falcons 31-10 in Atlanta the first week after our victory against the Colts. Then we hosted the New England Patriots, who had lost to the Green Bay Packers in the Super Bowl the year before. We beat the Patriots 27-7. That game was a good measuring stick for us and boosted our confidence. Just as quickly as we had been counted out, we were now 8-3 and on a 3-game winning streak. We split the next two on the road. We lost at Chicago to a bad Bears team. But then we turned around and beat the New York Giants in the Meadowlands 28. The Giants were en route to winning the NFC East. Next came our rematch with the defending Super Bowl champions, the Green Bay Packers. We talked at training camp about setting our sights on the top team in our division, which also happened to be the top team in the NFL, and this was our chance. Despite losing 3 straight games to Green Bay since my coaching staff had arrived in Tampa in 1996, we were optimistic that the way we were playing, plus playing the Packers in Tampa, would be the difference for us to win. But once again, though we kept the score close, we couldn't make the plays to beat them. With our record now 9-5, we headed back to the Meadowlands for the second time in 3 weeks, this time to play the New York Jets. Despite facing some adversity, both Trent Dilfer and Mike Alscott were hurt, we were determined to win this game, which would cement a playoff spot for us. At our team meeting the night before the game, I outlined our plan. We'd be aggressive, throwing passes to the receivers matched up against Otis Smith, whom we perceived to be the Jets' weaker cornerback. We were ready to go out and clinch a playoff berth. We went out and lost 31-0. Otis Smith ran 2 interceptions back for touchdowns. Guys were quiet on the flight home. Then the pilot announced over the intercom that the Carolina Panthers had lost to the Packers, putting us into the playoffs. The guys were quietly murmuring, uncertain of whether we could start celebrating or should still be in mourning. Before I could give it any thought, Brad Culpepper, our defensive tackle out of the University of Florida, picked up the microphone and announced over the PA, "Guys, we're in the playoffs. We haven't been into the playoffs in 15 years, and we're sure not going to be sad about it." I think Brad got it just right. So the season doesn't go quite as they had hoped. They lose some games that they had hoped to win, and their playoff spot is uncertain. But then the Carolina Panthers lose to the Packers, and that puts them in the playoffs. And they're like, should we be celebrating this? Because we almost didn't make it. But yeah, you should celebrate it, right? You finally made the playoffs. We finished the regular season against the Chicago Bears in Tampa. Despite the fact that we were already in the playoffs, we had a great deal riding on this game. If we won, we would host the first playoff game in Tampa, something that hadn't happened in 15 years. If we lost, we would have to travel. A new stadium was being built for the Buccaneers. It was several hundred yards away from the old stadium. It was scheduled to open for the 1998 season. I told the guys on Wednesday before the Bears game that this was set up perfectly for us. We had a chance to host a playoff game for our fans and make the final game in our old stadium a playoff game. But first, we had to focus on the week ahead. We did focus, and we beat the Bears convincingly, 31-15. In the process, with 10 wins, we tied the Buccaneer record for wins in a regular season. Immediately after our game, we watched the Lions win their game, thereby becoming our opponent for the first round of the playoffs. That year, we had split our 2 games with the Lions, each of us winning on the road. At the home game in Tampa, in the middle of our 3-game losing streak, Barry Sanders had become the first running back in NFL history to have 2 touchdowns run of more than 80 yards in the same game. He had scored all 3 of the Lions' touchdowns, absolutely gashing us for big runs and gaining 215 yards on only 24 carries. The NFL record for rushing yardage in a game is 295. Now he was approaching 2,000 yards for the season. In fact, Barry's season total for that year was still the 3rd highest season total in the history of the NFL. We had good reason to be concerned about playing the Lions again, but even so, our guys were excited. "Coach, that's exactly who we want to play." The following day, Monday, Brian and Joel Glazer walked into my office and said they were going over to the stadium to give donuts to the fans waiting in line for playoff tickets. They invited me to go with them, and we drove to the stadium anticipating a short visit. I imagined a line about like what you'd see at a movie box office. We were in for a surprise. The line stretched down the sidewalk, around the side of the stadium, out to the corner of Dale Mabry Highway, and then continued even farther around. There must have been 5,000 people eagerly waiting for a chance to buy a ticket for the game. That's when the feeling hit me. Look what we've done. We've done exactly what we hoped to do when we came here. Excite the community, win games, and create a team people are proud of and excited about. I walked around and mingled with the fans, thanking them for waiting all night to get a playoff ticket. It was remarkable. So in just a short amount of time, Tony has really changed this whole team around, the culture around, and thereby he's gotten the backing of the Tampa area around him now. And they're going to host this playoff game, and it says, it'll be the final game in their old stadium. So they're building this new stadium, and, things are really turning around. They've got fans waiting all night for playoff tickets. So things are really looking up for the Bucks and for Tony Dungy. On Tuesday mornings, I met with several of my fellow coaches for a Bible study. We are working our way through the Bible in a year, something we've continued to do ever since that 1997 season. I still have my notes from our meeting the week before we played Detroit. The Bible portion we looked at that day was fairly convicting for me in light of our excitement over making the playoffs. It was a good reminder of my priorities and my belief that we should maintain our schedule to protect those priorities regardless of the situation. The teaching that week was from Ephesians 5:25. We promised to memorize this verse from the New International Version. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. I have additional notes written beside the verse. Identify 10 specific ways to show love to your wife. Formulate them along with her. Love and don't be harsh, which was my favorite paraphrase of Colossians 3:19. Husbands, love your wives and never treat them harshly. Finally, my notes contained this, which makes so much sense theoretically, but is always so difficult to balance. How would your business do if you spent the amount of time on it that you spend on your wife and family? It's remarkable how, as we worked through the Bible that year, certain verses seemed to come up at particularly appropriate times. Let me read that to you again. How would your business do if you spent the amount of time on it that you spend on your wife and family? That's an interesting concept to think of, because how much of our day is spent on our job versus on our families. Although we spent our whole married life in the ultra-competitive world of professional football, Lauren and I had always tried to view it through God's eyes. As much fun as it was to be winning, we tried not to get caught up in it. We knew that our family life and our faith walk were more important. Fortunately, we both had great training from our parents, as well as from the pastors and chaplains we had been exposed to over the years. And Lauren had always made it to a point to help me see what was really important and to keep my job in the right perspective. I know that's why God brought us together. The competing views of success in our world often create an interesting tension. Society tends to define success in terms of accomplishments and awards, material possessions, and profit margins. In the football business, winning is the only thing that matters. God's Word, however, presents a different definition of success, one centered on a relationship with Jesus Christ and a love for God that allows us to love and serve others. God gives each one of us unique gifts, abilities, and passions. How well we use those qualities to have an impact on the world around us determines how successful we really are. Okay, I encourage y'all to go back and reread those past two paragraphs. If we get caught up in chasing what the world defines as success, we can use our time and talent to do some great things. We might even become famous, but in the end, what will it mean? What will people remember us for? Are other people's lives better because we lived? Did we make a difference? Did we use to the fullest the gifts and abilities God gave us? Did we give our best effort? And did we do it for the right reasons? God's definition of success is really one of significance, the significant difference our lives can make in the lives of others. This significance doesn't show up in win-loss records, long resumes, or the trophies gathering dust on our mantles. It's found in the hearts and lives of those we've come across who are in some way better because of the way we lived. I really encourage all to go reread those last 5 paragraphs of that section and think about what Tony Dungy is trying to say in terms of what success truly is. I will never forget my first time in the playoffs as a coach. I've gone other times since then, but none of the subsequent trips have been able to duplicate the feeling of that first playoff run. It was a new experience for so many on our team. We had coaches who had come straight from college football and many first and second year players. Most of our veterans had never experienced a playoff run. This was all new for the city of Tampa as well. The Buccaneers hadn't been in the playoffs since 1982. Our first playoff game was also the final game in the old Tampa Stadium. It was an unforgettable evening. Our players were eager to play the Lions again, and they were ready for Barry Sanders. Our defense swarmed all over the field, holding Sanders to 65 rushing yards and the Lions to only 78 passing yards. As I looked out onto the field midway through the fourth quarter, I realized that with the way our defense was playing, the Lions wouldn't be able to catch us. The player we had settled for in the 1996 draft, Mike Alstott, carried the ball for a 31-yard touchdown run to ice the game. We had won the last game in Tampa Stadium. After the game, our players ran around the field with Buccaneer flags. Brad Culpepper and others went up into the stands in full uniform to mingle with the crowd. It was bedlam. After I gave my interviews, Lauren drove us home, although many of the fans hadn't left yet. Others were still in traffic on Dale Mabry Highway. Lauren rolled down our windows and began honking the horn, yelling, "We won! We won a playoff game! We're going to Green Bay!" I was mortified. "Lauren, stop. I'm the coach. We can't be doing that." "I can't and I will." Lauren kept honking and yelling, and even I started waving at the fans, who were nothing short of ecstatic. We all were. It was a great feeling. Yes, we were headed to Green Bay, the defending Super Bowl champions, for the second round of the playoffs. The Bucs had never won a game in which the temperature at kickoff was less than 40 degrees, and we had lost to the Packers 4 straight times. Considering all this, we certainly were a confident bunch. So it's very exciting for them. They win the very last game ever played in the old Tampa Stadium. They're going to go play Green Bay, but it is going to be a very cold game. When the game got underway, we started slowly. Then Trent Dilfer threw 2 interceptions, and we rushed for only 90 yards. We lost 21-7. What a disappointment. It was an unsatisfying, empty ending to an otherwise great year. We flew home still proud of what we had accomplished, but our emotions were in the valley. When we arrived back at One Buck, there were people everywhere. The Bucs fans had been awaiting our arrival for hours. Our buses actually had to park blocks away, so we walked through the crowd, interacting with our fans. It was the perfect finish to a magical year. It was a good reminder to appreciate the joys of the moment. There would be time later to focus on improvement. We were obviously building the team the right way and could see our progress. At the end of our first year, the players dumped great Gatorade on me after our 6-10 finish. This year, following a playoff loss, the crowd of fans was so large we couldn't get into our facility. We were left to wonder, what will it look like when we finally win it all? So yes, they win this playoff game against Green Bay, but ultimately it's still a great season because the culture of the entire team has changed. They have all the fans behind them now. Even when they lose against Green Bay, when they come home, their fans are still cheering for them, telling them what a great season they had. And so Tony chooses to focus on the positives of that season rather than that last playoff loss. The 1998 offseason gave us a chance to continue adding depth to our defense and speed to our offense. We added Jaquez Green out of Florida with our first pick, which was actually in the second round. We picked Brian Kelly from Southern Cal as well. He remains a defensive standout in Tampa to this day. We also saw an opportunity to build on some of the support we had enjoyed in Tampa ever since we had first arrived. We wanted to benefit our community more intentionally. Our quarterbacks coach, Clyde Christensen, attended church with Mark Merrill, a Tampa attorney who had started an organization called Family First. Clyde and I have both grown up with very involved parents, and we are both sensitive to family issues. A year earlier, Clyde had arranged a meeting between Mark and me so we could discuss ways that NFL coaches could assist people in their most important coaching roles, as parents. We were meeting in my office just before the start to the 1997 season when I realized it was time for me to pick up 10-year-old Jamie from school. I apologized for cutting the meeting short. Mark later said that seeing me head off to pick up my son was more affirming for him than if we'd met for another hour. To be fair, picking up the kids was not the norm for me. Most days, my job was dropping the kids off at school, and Lauren would pick them up. For whatever reason, however, I had to get Jamie that day, and it was a great start of a great partnership with Mark Merrill. In the summer of 1998, Family First launched a new program called All Pro Dad. Clyde and I promoted the program, and we helped Mark host an event at the Bucs training camp. Fathers brought their children and interacted with them at the camp. Then we presented specific principles they could apply to being better dads. Clyde even helped Mark design a t-shirt for the event. A few years later, Clyde was wearing the t-shirt at the office. Nate Webster, a linebacker out of the University of Miami, a refreshingly candid person, stepped back to read Clyde's shirt. After he had read through the 10 best ways to be an all-pro dad, including things like love your wife, be a role model, show affection, eat together as a family, and pray, worship together. Nate said to Clyde and me, I need one of those shirts. I don't do any of those things with my kids. He really took the message to heart. I hope All Pro Dad has touched many fathers, and by extension, their wives and children. I hope we've been faithful in using our platform as professional football coaches to strengthen our community. So this is neat because he has been talking a lot about the improvements that he made with his team and the culture of his team. But in this section, he also talks about how he has reached out to the Tampa Bay area and was impacting the local community. He meets this guy, Mark Merrill, who was an attorney and who had started an organization called Family First. And then through the organization Family First, there's a new program launched called All Pro Dad. And Tony uses that program to go out and speak with different families and fathers and talk about what it's like to be a dad, right? The 10 ways to be an all-pro dad. And he's impacting people in the community as well as on the team. If the 1997 season was my favorite, the 1998 season might be the one I found most frustrating. The year started with great promise. We were coming off the magical 1997 season, and the new Raymond James Stadium was spectacular. Before the season began, I had the privilege of participating in its inaugural event. Even today, one of my favorite memories of my time in Tampa was the Brian Glazer's excited phone call informing me that the stadium's first event had just been scheduled, a Billy Graham crusade. He knew I would be excited too, and I'd become even more excited when I asked to share the stage with Dr. Graham and welcome the crusade to Tampa. Hearing Dr. Graham speak was awe-inspiring. Dr. Graham's messages were always so straightforward and to the point. I think that's why they're so powerful. God's gift to us is free and can't be earned. If you believe that Jesus died for your sins, you can live forever with him in heaven. No matter what has happened in your past, that free gift is offered to you. That was it. So simple, so clear. When Dr. Graham finished, he invited everyone in the stadium to come and accept God's free gift of a life-changing relationship with Christ. People began streaming down every stairwell. They kept coming and coming and coming. I had never seen anything like it. Watching what God can do through a simple message shared by such a humble man, I was overwhelmed almost to the point of tears. It wouldn't be the last time that happened to me in that stadium. So the new stadium, Raymond James Stadium, is finally built. It's ready for the new season, but a football game is not the first event held there. The first event held there is a Billy Graham crusade. And if you don't know who Billy Graham is, he was a very famous pastor and speaker who would do like these basically stadium tours and just preach the gospel to people, just like Tony talked about in those paragraphs. And so it's really neat for Tony to see that that is the first event in the new Buccaneers Stadium. As for football, we had improved from 1996 to 1997, and we should have kept improving in 1998. Instead, we finished 8-8, with the most inconsistent playing of any team I've ever fielded. We'd play well one week and badly the next. Our problems weren't only on one side of the ball. Our defense alternated between hot and cold performances. Our offense scored in bunches one week and then suffered through droughts. We had lost to Green Bay 6 times in a row, then finally broke that streak by causing 8 fumbles and sacking Brett Favre 8 times. We handed 15-1 Minnesota their only regular season loss. But we also lost to 6-10 New Orleans team, twice to Detroit, and to Jacksonville when we blew a fourth quarter lead. We headed into the final game with a record of 7-8. If we won at Cincinnati, and if Arizona lost to San Diego, we'd be back in the playoffs. Barely. We went on the road and finally put together a complete game, beating the Bengals 35-0. I was proud of our team. We were now relying on the San Diego Chargers, who had only 5 wins that season, to get us into the playoffs by beating Arizona. We watched the beginning of the game at the airport on the overhead televisions. Some of the guys clustered around tiny handheld televisions. We hung on every play. When our plane took off, San Diego was poised for a comeback win after being down 13-3 in the third quarter. A short time into our flight, the pilot's voice came over the intercom. Air traffic control knows whom I have on board the aircraft this evening, and they wanted me to tell you congratulations on today's game. We all sat breathlessly. They also had passed along the scores from the late afternoon games, including Arizona, who kicked a field goal on the last play to beat. I didn't hear the rest, even though our plane was deathly quiet. What distinguished the 1997 team from the 1998 team was not those 2 extra wins that put us into the playoffs. The 1997 team was simply a better steward of its opportunities. Every team has its own unique set of dispositions, gifts, talents, and opportunities. What they all have in common, however, is the ability to control what they do with those dispositions, gifts, and talents when the opportunities come along. The 1997 team was younger, with less depth and game experience. The 1998 team filled in some of those holes and was a year more ingrained into our system. On paper, the 1998 team was a better team, but our 1997 team stretched itself and achieved its potential. The 1998 team was inconsistent and squandered chances. I still believe what I told the team the day after the finale against Cincinnati. We have a good team, but we didn't take advantage of the opportunities we were given all year. That's why we had to rely on someone else. We cannot do that again. The same is also true for each of us as individuals. That, to me, is where we find the best definition of success. We're not all going to reach the Super Bowl or the top of the corporate ladder, but we each have a chance to walk away from something saying, I did the ordinary things as well as I could. I performed to the full limits of my ability. I achieved success. Under that definition, a 5-11 team might actually be more successful than a 14-2 team. Someday I might coach another team that needs to win its final game and needs help from another team to get into the playoffs. That won't be a problem for me as long as the team has played to the limits of its abilities and has fulfilled its potential. Our 1997 team played to and beyond its potential. Our 1998 team did not. So that's very disappointing from him. He has a great year with the 1997 team. They give it their all. They play to their full potential. So he goes into 1998 thinking, okay, it's even going to be better this year. And it's not. It's worse. And he says there in these last few paragraphs, right, that they didn't take advantage of the opportunities they were given all year. He goes on to say, each of us have a chance to walk away from something saying, I did the ordinary things as well as I could. I performed to the full limits of my ability. I achieved success. The problem is that the 1998 team did not do that, right? They did not perform to the full limits of their abilities, and so they did not do well that year.